Welcome all to a dark and disturbing place, where all that is good fails to reach. I hope you're all sitting comfortably, as today we will be examining some of the worst horrors your mind cannot even begin to comprehend. Ancient evils of a forgotten time, whose only goal is the complete and utter annihilation of everything we hold dear. To them, our planet is nothing more than an appetizer in their absolute hunger for destruction. Today, I give you my picks of the most unnerving, most terrifying, most unholy abominations that the gaming world has to offer. Alright, I probably know what you're thinking. What the absolute hell is this? What was that voice? What was that thumbnail? What was that entire intro segment? Just what is the depths of your twisted mind created and unleashed upon the internet? Well, if you'd allow me to explain, Eldritch Abominations. What are they? Well, simply put, they're a horror trope that essentially covers any sort of entity that is indescribable in some way. Typically ancient, but not always, and nearly 100% evil. Think things like Pennywise from Stephen King's It, or just about anything H.P. Lovecraft created. Hell, Lovecraftian creatures are probably the most well-known examples of the trope, but aside from that, they've actually popped up everywhere from anime, to comics, to entire online narratives. Just look at the Slender Man mythos and the SCP Foundation. However, the one factor binding them all together is that they truly defy any sort of concrete explanation. While they have a history and physical presence and can be very easily observed, the true inner workings of them are almost entirely unknowable. Trust me, this will make more sense the further we go, but in layman's terms, when it comes to these creatures, we know the what and the when, but not the how, the where, or the why. As for additional criteria, all I'm looking for besides the official definition of being truly inexplainable is two things: evil intent, and the creepier the better. The latter goes without saying, but as for the former, it's not enough to just be acting on base instinct. I'm looking for malevolence here. Something that is actively aware of what it's doing and enjoying it. Alright then, shall I begin? So, I planned on starting off tame with this video, or as tame as one can get when dealing with unspeakable horrors at least. But then again, Gravemind, and by extension the entire Flood infection, is pretty damn horrifying when it comes down to the specifics. I mean, just look at that thing. The only way I can describe it is it's a giant fungus tendril with a goddamn mouth. Compared to most entries on this list, we actually know a fair amount of information about our dear friend Gravemind. Not that it's really interested in being friends with anyone, but eh. So, what is Gravemind? Well, simply put, it's the final evolution of the Flood virus, itself being a virus that lives for one purpose: to spread and consume. What does it eat, I hear you ask? Literally everything that isn't Flood, I answer. Keep in mind that this virus is actually intelligent and is actively seeking out food sources and hosts, with Gravemind serving as a hive mind of sorts for all the individual Flood spores and infected hosts across the whole damn galaxy. Yes, I said galaxy. And that's basically all we know. We know how they infect hosts and how they spread to a degree, but there's no knowledge on where it originated from. Is it a natural virus? Is it a bioweapon? If it's a bioweapon, then who made it? Gravemind isn't exactly telling us either, with its only priority being directing the Flood towards new food and protecting itself by manipulating both sides of the Human and Covenant war to get what it wants, making allies with significant players and factions only to discard said alliances and feed on them moments later. As for said factions, the UNSC have literally no idea what the Flood even is, having been caught completely surprised by the infection in the first game, and as for the Covenant, they're paranoid and absolutely terrified of this thing, dedicating entire squads of highly trained soldiers to utterly destroy even the slightest sign of infection. It's not until later on that we learn the only thing that could stop the Gravemind's infection was to wipe out every non-Flood life in the galaxy and force them to starve. That's horrifying! Although given the severity of the situation, not entirely unwanted. Let's turn back the clock to 65 million years ago, where one day something fell to Earth in a huge explosion of fire and ash. Something so powerful it changed the course of the planet's history forever. In our world, this impact was the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. But in Chrono Trigger, this wasn't a rock. Instead, this was something much worse. A gigantic parasitic creature that burrowed into the very core of the planet and began absorbing its energy. This was Lavos. As far as ancient parasites go, Lavos is pretty terrifying when you think about it. Sure, something living in the very core of the planet sucking the life out of the very world we live on is bad enough, but it turns out that Lavos has been manipulating and directing the course of human society for years, increasing their intellectual capacity and even granting some of them the ability to use magic, thanks to a part of Lavos that broke away from it when it first collided with a planet millennia ago, known as the Frozen Flame. However, what secures Lavos' place here on this list is what happens to it in the story. Across the years, many individuals learned of the secret being lying deep beneath their feet. Some worshipped it, and some, like the sorcerer Magus, attempted to destroy it. Magus in particular trained all his life, becoming the most powerful magic user in history, attempted to summon Lavos, and is almost destroyed himself. And this is the guy who basically won a war single-handedly. Don't think that this power of Lavos is cutscene only, mind you, as by the time you get to fight him, you get to see just how terrifyingly powerful he is. Not only does he passively create temporal distortions, but he can effortlessly use a gigantic amount of magic attacks, including all sorts of elemental barrages, and inflicting nearly every status ailment in the game. But he can also draw energy from the planet's core to power himself up, heal himself, and even regenerate and revive his various components. Hell, there's then the battle with him where he summons avatars based on the strongest warriors in history, including futuristic war machines and even Magus himself. And then we have the alternate futures involving this thing. The most well-known is when Lavos bursts out of the ground, destroying the world in a massive wave of fire and destruction. Then there's what happens in Chrono Cross, where Lavos merges with another entity to create the Time Devourer. So, what's that do? Oh, nothing much, apart from possess the ability to devour, as in eat, the entirety of space-time. It's basically planning to eat the entirety of existence. How? Sure, some of you think Lavos should be higher, but the main thing holding him back is his lack of intelligence, as Lavos isn't really doing this because of some grand plan, or because he feels like it. He's doing it because that's just the lifespan of his species. Which is fine, I guess, but I'm looking for more malevolent evils here. Sometimes raw power just isn't really enough. Warning! The following entry contains massive spoilers for Pokemon Sword and Shield, as it's pretty much impossible to discuss it without spoiling significant events from that game's plot. So if you do not want that game spoiled, please skip ahead to the time shown below. Thank you. So, Sword and Shield are probably some of my favourite Pokemon games right now, even though that's probably because the Galar region is based on my home country. Go Britain! Sure, the story was a little lacking, but everything else is pretty solid. Dynamaxing is probably my favourite gimmick so far, on account of just how ridiculous giant Pokemon are, and the roster this time around is superb. Reasonable variants in evolutionary forms like Obstagoon, Sirfetch'd, and Cursula, and a bit more life in the Pokemon that were pretty underwhelming in earlier games. Dracovish, Flapple, and Cinderace probably have some of my favourite designs so far, but then we have the legendaries. Throughout our adventure through the Galar region, we constantly learn about the legend of the Darkest Day. Initially, we thought it was just one hero that helped save the region from a calamity of sorts, but we eventually find out there's actually two heroes and the legendary Pokemon, Zacian and Zamazenta. But what about the calamity? Well, halfway through your champion match, you get interrupted by Chairman Rose, aka Chairman of the official Pokemon League in Galar, who informs you of his plan to save the region for an apparent energy crisis, and his solution is to cause the Darkest Day. The same Darkest Day that threatened to destroy the region centuries prior. And said Darkest Day happens to be our number 8 entry, a monstrous Pokemon known as Eternatus. So, damn. Remember when the most evil-looking legendaries were Darkrai and Giratina? Ah, good times. In a rarity for the series, we get to see just how powerful Eternatus is in gameplay, as just before you face off against it, you see it break out of a capture attempt from the regional champion before you and your rival battle it. As you'd expect, this thing is a monster to take down, and when you finally defeat it, you're relieved. For about 10 seconds. Remember Dynamax? Turns out that Eternatus is a source of the energy that allows Pokemon to Dynamax, and it can do the same. And it is horrifying. Your Pokemon literally can't do anything to hurt it or even move, and you're only saved by calling upon the help of Zacian and Zamazenta, who arrive in the nick of time. Even with their help, it's still a grueling fight to finally bring this thing down and catch it. However, this leaves us with a bunch of questions, namely being just what it is. Its default form looks like a draconic creature made out of crystals, with its Gigantamax form resembling a giant hand reaching out to grasp you, but we never get an answer to its origins. Mind you, there have been theories. Some say it's connected to AZ and his ultimate weapon, some think it's connected to the Ultra Beasts, and some think it's an incarnation of pure hatred and evil. Personally, I think it looks incomplete. One of Eternities is an ancient extra-dimensional entity that pressed itself against our reality and tried to pull itself through. Maybe it looks incomplete, because that's all it can manifest, and the Gigantamax form is attempting to pull the rest of itself through. The arm does seem to end in a portal, so possibly? Maybe we'll get an update explaining it? Probably. When you put both Legend of Zelda and Abomination in the same sentence, you typically arrive at either Calamity Ganon from Breath of the Wild or Majora from Majora's Mask. But in keeping with my tendency to do the complete unexpected, I'm going with the villain of the first Zelda game I ever played, Bellum from Phantom Hourglass. So, giant demonic squid. Not your typical villain, but let's see what we have to work with. Prior to the events of Phantom Hourglass, Bellum encountered the Ocean King, the ruler of the dimension Phantom Hourglass takes place in, and attempted to drain his life force and that of one of the three Force Spirits, which they only escape by splitting their souls, the Ocean King splitting his soul away from his body, with the Spirit of Courage having to resort to splitting her very essence in half, losing her memories in the process. Let me rephrase that. Bellum was almost successful in draining the life force from a god. So, why did he do this? He just wants to sustain himself by draining the life force of any and all living things. After draining the life force of the Ocean King, Bellum then went on to inhabit the depths of the Temple of the Ocean King, and turn it into the worst Zelda dungeon ever designed. That is to say that he cursed it, drained the life of all who would dare enter. Only know the Phantoms, those invincible armored knights that patrol the halls? Yeah, he created those, and it's highly possible he created the ghost ship too, all to aid in his quest in draining as much life force from the world as possible. Hell, he's practically invincible in the story and for the majority of his boss fights, forcing Link to travel to the furthest corners of the Ocean King's world in order to find the 3 pure metals needed to make a sword that can defeat him just to stand a chance of putting him down. Typical, you're an all-powerful demon lord, well on your way to victory, only for some 10-year-old to waltz into your lair, whip out a magic sword and kill you with it. Don't you just hate it when that happens? Dead Space is honestly one of my favourite horror games. The atmosphere is brilliantly tense, the story strikes a balance between interesting and horrifying, and the enemy designs are just brilliant. Not only are they grotesque to look at, they're also brilliantly unique in how you dispatch them, requiring strategic experiment rather than just filling them with bullets. But the Necromorphs aren't our next entry. Instead, I'm gonna go with what happens when the Necromorphs infect a whole planet's worth of hosts. And the result isn't pretty. This, my dear viewers, is the Brethren Moon. So, how exactly do we go from a giant swarm of Necromorphs to a sentient ball of flesh the size of a small planet? Through a process known as a convergence level event, where the Necromorphs literally merge together into this thing. And yes, I did say sentient, this thing somehow has the intelligence of basically everything the Necromorphs consumed, completely overwriting the original instinct-driven minds of the original Necromorphs. As for what they do, well, similar to how the Gravemind serves this to the Flood, they act as the final stage of the Necromorph life cycle, and naturally they desire to spread the Necromorph corruption to other worlds. How do they do this? Well, you know the markers, those weird artifacts that somehow spread the Necromorph virus? Yeah, they make them, and they send them to various planets. Although considering how the black marker that arrived on Earth crash-landed over 65 million years ago, this means that they don't just seek out worlds with intelligent life, but rather seek out worlds that hold the potential to have intelligent life, or as a scientist studied the black marker in the universe theorized, the markers themselves influence the evolution of life on the worlds they land on. Okay, so influencing the development of an entire species just so you can eventually infect and assimilate them and reproduce is bad enough, but they would have been ranked above the previous entries on that alone. And that's where the Dead Space 3 Arrival DLC comes in. So called because they arrive at Earth. Why? Because throughout the course of the series, our engineered protagonist Isaac Clarke has destroyed a fair number of markers in addition to killing a Brethren Moon at the end of the third game. Simply put, these guys are angry. So they come to Earth with the sole intention of destroying the planet. Not just infecting, consuming and completely destroying. And they send at least a minimum of 3, and it took everything Isaac had plus an almost planetary level destruction event to take down 1. Pretty certain Earth is fucked. It was nice while it lasted. Admittedly, this next entry kinda bucks the whole trend, being a sort of interpretation of the trope rather than a straight-placed example. but they fit so well thematically that I felt I'd be doing a massive disservice by excluding them from the rankings, because despite how much they play around with the rules of this list and how different they are from the other entries, the Reapers from Mass Effect are more than deserving of a spot here. Sure, they're a synthetic race of sentient spaceships whose origin gets explained more and more the further we go into the Mass Effect series, but are they ancient? Why, yes. Yes, they are. And are they evil? Oh, absolutely. Created millions upon millions of years ago by a race known as the Leviathans, the Reapers were initially designed to protect the Leviathans during an uprising by what they deemed thralls. Basically, the thralls had a relationship where they would serve the Leviathans in return for their protection. The thralls eventually developed to the point where they grew tired of this relationship and built synthetic weapons to rebel against their masters, only for the Leviathans to craft the Reapers in response. Unfortunately, the Reapers deemed that the only way to end the conflict in its entirety was to completely eradicate, or cleanse the universe of all organic life. And it didn't stop there. Knowing that organics would eventually rise again, the Reapers created both the Mass Effect relays, essentially the things that make travel across the galaxy possible, and the Citadel, which is basically a giant space station. Why did they do this? Because they wanted the organics to discover them, and wanted the organics to base their technology around them, and retreat into dark space, aka the space between galaxies, and waited. And so, when the Reapers decided that the number of organics became too great, they moved back in and began cleansing. And no, this isn't what happened in Mass Effect 3, or even what happened with the Protheans in the previous cycle 50,000 years ago. This has been going on for millions and millions of years, with the one in Mass Effect 3 being the final one, and that's only due to humanity and the other races being just too damn stubborn to give up. And that cycle only ended due to Shepard ending the Reaper threat by either assuming control of the Reapers, making them serve their will for a change, sacrificing their life to merge together all organic and synthetic life in the galaxy, or just straight up annihilating the Reapers. And for that last one, it was no easy feat, as these things can take a hell of a ton of punishment before going down. Outside of a weapon designed to kill all synthetics, the only things that have been able to kill a Reaper are a giant orbital laser, a skyscraper-sized worm about the same size as one, and an entire fleet unloading everything they have into one. Yeah, I'd say they've more than earned their place on this list. Our next entry isn't normally something you consider for a list like this, but given the nature of just what she is, I'd say she definitely qualifies. After all, the scariest monsters are those who look just like us. When it comes to horror game villains, Fear's Alma Wade is simultaneously the most tragic and the most terrifying villain I've ever seen. So, what exactly is she? Well, get ready because this gets very dark very fast. Alma is basically the ghost of an extremely powerful psychic who was taken in by a shady organization and experimented upon in their efforts to understand the nature of her powers. Alright, pretty standard stuff, but then she started failing every test she was given on purpose due to getting frustrated with her captors, and even going so far as to influence a scientist with delusions and nightmares. In an attempt to stop this, she was forcibly induced into a coma and sealed in a special containment. At the age of 8! She was later forcibly impregnated to be used as a means of creating 2 psychic soldier prototypes, once when she was 15 and then again when she was 16, before finally being killed after her life support was deactivated at the age of 26. But Alma wasn't going to let a trivial thing like death stop her. Now completely unbound by the restrictions of her physical body and, I guess, the laws of reality somehow, Alma's psychic power grew to insane levels. The first Fear game plays like an average, if tense, first-person shooter, but whenever Alma shows up, it very quickly shifts gears into horror. Alma not only has the standard powers of causing hallucinations and shifting her appearance, going from creepy child to even creepy adult, but she can also pull people into a nightmarish, illusionary world of her own creation. Illusions and mind games aren't her only tricks, as she's more than capable of manipulating the physical world too, with her favourite things to do being setting people on fire and vaporizing people into a bloody mist. Lovely! By the time of Fear 3, she's been shown to be able to manipulate people into carrying out her will, even going as far as driving some into complete insanity and physically mutilating them into monsters. She's even been shown to generate huge shockwaves that can cause huge damage and even manipulate the weather and light levels, and even allow herself to interact with the physical world. However, we later learn something even worse. Alma is pregnant. I'm not sure how a ghost can get pregnant, but let's not worry about that. If she gives birth, that would mean the end of the world. Oh, and those shockwaves and earthquakes, those are her contractions. And the time between them decreases as you go through the game. And while you do stop her in time, you get the feeling that if you were even the slightest bit slower, the entire world would have been destroyed. Most Dark Souls, and by extension Bloodborne bosses, come in two flavors. Either the depressingly tragic, or the oh sweet Jesus, what the fuck is that thing? Guess which category our next entry falls under. Say hi to the great ones, everybody. Normally I'd stay the hell away from something like the Soulsborne series, hey, I'm someone who likes both their sanity and controllers intact, but this opportunity was far too fitting to pass up. Bloodborne borrows a lot from gothic horror and Lovecraftian fiction as it is, and it was honestly a real challenge to pick just one of these guys. All of them could have easily made it onto here. I almost went with Murgo's Wet Nurse, but I think I have to give this one to the Moon Presence. As far as final boss fights go, the Moon Presence is pretty far up the whole Mind Screw scale. Yeah, that sentence didn't make a whole lot of sense, but neither does this boss fight. Hell, just getting to it is rather cryptic, as you can only fight it by refusing the request of the first hunter German, fighting and defeating him, and eating 3/3 of all things, umbilical cord. Blah! Honestly, the Moon Presence is probably the only entry on this list that is honestly, truly unexplained. Like the other great ones, we never truly learned anything about it, and that's not due to the cryptic lore the series is known for. Based on its appearance, resembling that of, and I'm going to horribly butcher this, Nyarlathotep from H.P. Lovecraft's works, we can assume that it's probably one of the more powerful great ones, and because it's one of the three enemies that have the phrase nightmare slain, rather than prey hunted, appear upon death. And due to finding it in the hunter's dream, we can at least infer that it's got something to do with the whole situation that the game revolves around. Potentially being responsible for the creation of the plague that's responsible for 90% of the creatures and problems you deal with in the game, and is responsible for trapping Yarn in a perpetual nightmare. Hell, given how you fight it in the hunter's dream of all places, aka the, I guess, separate plane of reality that serves as a central hub / safe zone, we can somewhat assume it has some control over reality. And what's up with that name? Moon Presence. Is this thing the moon we see in game? So is this the actual moon in the world of Bloodborne, or does it just act as one of the nightmare? Hell, the name also implies it isn't even its true physical form, just something it chooses to fight you. Honestly, I'm really confused here, but as a giant walking Lovecraft reference, that's kind of the point. It's supposed to be unknowable because knowing the truth would, in-game, literally drive you insane, and in the real world take away the mystery and just make it your average monster. Nicely done there, From Software. I'm going to be honest here. I didn't think all that much of Gygas at first. I honestly found him somewhat generic. He was always just that evil being that came to Earth. Well, I guess I did find the whole childbirth and fetus symbol somewhat cool. Hell, it's almost as if this game series is called Mother or something. But after a bit of research, I think he's more than deserving of the number 2 spot. He first shows up in Earthbound Beginnings, or Earthbound 0, or Mother 1, where he was adopted by a human couple, Maria and George, but was forced to betray them after he was instructed by his species to make it so humans could never use PSI power against them. Flash forward 80 years when Ninten and his companions tried to stop him when Gygas attempted an invasion, where he was literally unbeatable until a lullaby was used to weaken him. But it's his appearance in Earthbound that's the most well known here. In this game, Gygas basically succeeds in his mission to conquer Earth. But after learning of his prophesied defeat by Ness, the game's main protagonist, he travelled into the past to prevent it. Unfortunately, by that point, Gygas' guilt over betraying his adopted mother caused his body to emit such intense evil power that he not only lost his mind, becoming completely unaware to what he was doing, but also his physical form became completely undefinable by human standards. As the game describes, he is the evil power. And damn did they go all out with the theme here. Like something out of H.P. Lovecraft, Gygas' influences spread all across Ness's home of Eagleland, manipulating creatures and with some people even being influenced into being his servants, with some like Porky Minch clearly being driven insane by it, choosing to follow him out of fear after being consumed rather than anything else. As for physical form, yeah, that's what I call undefinable. A constantly shifting red thing that's borderline shapeless, becoming more erratic in design as the fight goes on, even taking the shape of an unborn baby at one point, all while making rather disturbing comments and screaming Ness's name over and over again. Hell, Ness and Party couldn't really do anything to hurt Gygas during this fight, At this point his power was so great it threatened the very universe itself. Only by praying to the people of the world to lend them all of their power did they even stand a chance. So if this guy threatened all of existence, why isn't he number one? Well, I already explained it. By that stage, he's insane. Mindless. And at the start of the video, I mentioned that I'm focusing on intelligent evils. Gygas doesn't really qualify for that, unfortunately, and while I'm sure that he easily tops someone else's list, I just found something that fits the top spot a little more. I'll be honest with you here. This was probably the hardest video for me to rank by a very high margin. I shifted the order of the entries around currently based on how much I like the character, impact on their respective stories, and overall power level. And the latter is what I eventually chose to go with. If you were paying attention, you noticed that the first half of this list were purely physical threats, with the reality warpers and truly unknowable stuff being saved for the top 4. Well, Lavos did end up threatening all of space-time at one point, but that's only in one possible future, and only after fusing with another powerful character. That being said, for the number 1 spot, I felt like I needed something ridiculously powerful. Something who threatened all of existence, and then some. Never in a million years did I think I'd find one in a Sonic game of all places. For all the crap that gets thrown towards Sonic 06 and its many flaws, the few things they got right were honestly pretty well done. Yeah, Solaris is probably the most batshit crazy thing ever seen in a Sonic game, and I love it. For a start, its true origin is essentially completely unknown. We know that sometime in the past it got split into 2 entities, Mephiles, the embodiment of its cunning intelligence, who spends most of the game looking like Shadow, and Iblis, a fiery, mindless beast that embodies its sheer destructive power. But the main issue here is that this only happened due to the characters travelling back in time to witness the creation of both, after already being made aware of their existence. Hell, when Shadow first meets Mephiles, Mephiles already knows who Shadow is. Alright, so a completely unknown origin is fine, but just how powerful is Solaris? Well, after becoming this thing, Mephiles showcases the ability to clone himself, even creating an entire army of clones in the end of Shadow's story, and can basically melt to the ground, becoming Shadow's, well, Shadow. And thanks to copying his appearance, it looks like he's also copied some of Shadow's chaos powers if there's energy attacks or anything to go by. As for Iblis, he literally destroyed the world in the original timeline, and has almost complete control of fire and lava, reducing the world to a burnt-out, lava-filled husk. Hell, the only way Iblis could be defeated was by sealing him away, with both Princess Elise and Blaze being used as toast of the process, the latter even having to sacrifice herself in order to do so. All of this comes to a head in the final story, where out of nowhere Mephiles appears, straight up kills Sonic by impaling him with an energy spear, causing Elise to release Iblis, the two to merge into Solaris, and start causing all of reality to collapse in on itself. The remaining characters embark on a fetch quest to collect the Chaos Emeralds, again, where we witness the sheer level of distortion Solaris has caused as the levels are essentially being consumed by voids as we run through them, and once they obtain the Emeralds and we witness those infamously terrible moments in Sonic history, Sonic is reborn, and he, Shadow, and Silver go super and battle Solaris to save the universe. After a lengthy fight, which should be it, we learn just how powerful Solaris is. Sure, Commander Shepard had to sacrifice their life to stop the Reapers, Ness and Co had to give up their physical bodies to battle Gygas, and the Bloodborne Hunter had to give up their very humanity to stop the Moon Presence. None of that would work here, unfortunately. Solaris is so powerful that not only does beating down its physical body not really factor into anything, its nature existing at all points in time simultaneously means that the only way it can be defeated is by undoing its very creation, which Sonic happily does by blowing out the flame it's reduced to after the fight. And while this has the knock-on effect of erasing the events of Sonic 06 from canon, not many people would complain about that. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you all next time.